We're speaking with Congressman Adrian Smith of Gering. This is the day right after his first Farm Bill listening session in Scotts Bluff. Took about an hour's worth of time. A lot of input during that listening session. Number of things. The thing that caught me, and I did a story on it, was the fact that Mr. Larson said, or acted, he said basically we're in the 80s right now, which is kind of maybe a troubling statement a little bit, because we all remember what the 80s were like with agriculture 40 years ago.
Well, I think certainly we're facing challenging times for agriculture, with the crop prices being low, especially in contrast to when they were pretty high. And it seems like not so long ago.
Yeah, just a few years ago.
Right. So, but I think there's concern. I mean, it can be characterized a number of ways, but I also think that there are a lot of things, a lot of lessons learned back in the 80s, and many producers have avoided some of the mistakes that were made perhaps back in the 80s. But make no mistake, we're facing some challenging times.
All right. Yesterday there was some talk about the crop insurance program. Greg Schmall was there, said, hey, we did $12 billion in cuts here in the since basically 2010. We don't need any more cuts. Is that likely, do you think?
Well, there will be critics, there always are, and the message, though, that Greg Schmall shared yesterday is one that I've been sharing with my colleagues, that perhaps my colleagues who might be critical of crop insurance, to say, hey, there were significant cuts already made, but when you look at the crop insurance as it currently stands, it's, I think, been pretty successful. Where premiums are paid in, yes, some taxpayer dollars are used as well. But if we can prevent the need for ad hoc disaster payments, that can save a lot of money right there.
Wouldn't you say it's one of the more successful programs the government runs?
I think it is. It's applied, it's marketed in the private sector. There have been some attempts over the years, perhaps for the government to take it over entirely, but those have not succeeded. But I think given its public-private partnership, it has been successful, and especially as it has prevented the need for ad hoc disaster payments.
One other thing Phyllis Norwood mentioned, she'd like to see some infrastructure, some of the infrastructure money the president's talking about go to surface water irrigation projects and so forth, and repairs, and you're right on top of that right now, right?
Right. I'm circulating a letter from my colleagues. I'm leading that letter and asking colleagues to join me in signing that, to remind the president that irrigation infrastructure is part of our nation's infrastructure, certainly part of our food security strategy. And so it's very sophisticated. Oftentimes, I think we take it for granted because it's been around a long time, but it really is a tremendous asset to our country, to the livelihood for rural Americans especially, but really all consumers benefit from this type of infrastructure, and it's important, I think, for the president to be reminded of that.
Okay, so hopefully maybe he'll add some money to that. Let's talk about D.C. I know the big story right now, North Korea. What's your thoughts about North Korea? And it seems like we're going kind of tit for tat talking. Hopefully it doesn't result in any engagement at all.
Right. Well, certainly it's. I would find it to be a pretty tense situation. I know that North Korea, they want to do things to try to be relevant, and the fact of the matter is their style of government just they are showing does not work, and the fact that it doesn't work, there's more evidence all the time, and the very stark contrast between North and South Korea. I'm shocked that North Koreans put up with that type of situation, especially with a dictator who's wanting to be relevant and will pursue various actions based on the desire to be relevant. So I think it shows why we need to be very vigilant, and why we should make sure that we have the best technology in terms of our defense to make sure that something bad does not happen.
What's your thoughts about what the president? He seems more willing, I think, than his predecessor to respond to things that occur internationally that he's not pleased with.
Well, the president has taken, I think, some very important and relevant steps, whether it's Syria, whether it's other situations, and I think that the president, he means business. And I know that when President Obama said that, he was drawing the line with Syria, and then Syria crossed the line and President Obama didn't do anything, that sent a big message, I think, around the world. And certainly our new president now is operating in a different fashion. And I think that responding to the chemical weapons attack in Syria was timely and relevant and appropriate. Also, I think we want to be strategic overall. I know that there will always be critics. We know that, but what our president is doing to send a message that he's serious, I think can be good strategically.
Yeah, he did back off a little bit on NATO. Actually, mentioned that he thinks you had mentioned, I think, in a previous interview, that was one of the areas where you kind of disagreed with him a little bit. Are you glad he's kind of coming back to where he looks at NATO as a thing that he supports?
I am. I think when you look at countries who view freedom in a similar way, it's very important to join forces and to stand together. And so I think the president has a new appreciation for that.
Yeah. Let's talk about things in Washington right now. A lot of talk about health care reform and trying to get a compromise bill somehow passed through, because the president says we need to get this done before we need to get tax reform done. Are you kind of in line with what he's thinking now?
Overall, yes. I mean, a lot of details need to be worked out, but with health care, we know that we have a mess on our hands. So when I hear from individuals who are paying $2,000 and more per month for a health care premium, that used to be an annual premium not so long ago, and now it's a monthly premium, and that's in addition to a high copay, high deductible. We have a mess on our hands, and I think a lot of people understand that, even those who may not be facing those individual market premiums. But fact of the matter is, we need to find a way to get the bill moving forward. It won't be a final bill. This will be an approach. Some of my colleagues think it goes too far. Others think it doesn't go far enough. But we need to get moving on this and get the Senate moving as well. Because we need to bring some resolution to a huge problem we have, and that's too much government in healthcare. And so I truly believe when you look at the history of the cost of health insurance, the more the government's gotten involved, the more expensive it has become. And not much has been done to really reduce the cost of health care, which we know is a driver of the cost of health insurance. One thing we are looking at is the equal tax treatment of health insurance. So that's something we've needed to do for a long time. Someone who may not choose a health plan through their employer, or who may not have one available from their employer, they should not be penalized in the tax code as they go out to get a plan of their own.
So is there much movement right now? I mean, you mentioned while we were talking, there is an amendment out there, but we probably need to do more amendments to get everybody kind of moving in the right direction.
And I think that type of thing is in motion. Based on the number of colleagues who didn't want to be blamed for the bill not coming to a vote a couple of weeks ago, I actually see that as a good sign. That, hey, let's not repeat this same thing. Let's get something done. Let's focus on solutions so that we can move forward to tax reform that we know will be a great thing to grow our economy and create more opportunity for the future.
All right. When we do get to tax reform, the president has talked about a number of things. Lowering corporate taxes, I think, is one of the main things on his mind. How low can we reduce corporate taxes?
Well, overall, we need to broaden the base to lower the rate. How low we can bring the rate depends on how on other dynamics in terms of how much we can broaden the base. There are various proposals out there. I think this is a debate that we've been needing to have for a long time. This conversation, I think, can be, and so far, I think, has been healthy. take the corporate tax code. Right now, we have such an uncompetitive corporate tax code that U.S. companies who have done well overseas, which is, I think, fundamentally a good thing, but we don't benefit from it as much here domestically because these U.S. companies leave that cash that they've generated overseas to avoid such a punitive tax code here in the U.S. And they're investing those profits elsewhere. That's not good for us domestically. Let's change our tax code to make it more competitive. Even President Obama said we need to have a more competitive corporate and lower a corporate tax rate. And of course, there are other details than just the rate as well. But certainly we do need to reform our corporate tax code. We ought not leave small businesses behind who oftentimes pay taxes through the individual tax code. President Obama, he was so concerned about taxing rich people more than they're already being taxed that I think he kind of backed himself into a corner and was unable to really have a discussion about comprehensive tax reform. Ironically, he supported reducing the rate for large corporations, but not for small businesses. So, but we're beyond that now. Let's move forward to overall broaden the base, lower the rate, because we know that's good for the economy. And when we can grow the economy in a substantial way with permanent tax code, permanent tax policy, I will add, that is very important. I would imagine there will be some efforts to try to negotiate temporary tax policy. But when it's temporary, it's not as productive economically as permanent tax policy can be.
Yeah, something people can rely on, right?
Right.
Okay. We mentioned the infrastructure thing. That may be pushed down a little bit down the road with all these other things that the president's talking about. But where do we get the money for infrastructure? Hopefully through the tax reform, and then we move on to the infrastructure.
Part of it is
right?
through tax reform. Even though tax reform would be revenue neutral, it wouldn't be a huge money grab. It would not be a huge tax cut either. It would be, like I said, broadening the base, lower the rates so that revenues are more consistent. I would also add, but the paying for infrastructure, that's a big dilemma we're facing right now. I think that if we can get the economy going, though, and get those revenues up because of a growing economy, channeling those toward infrastructure and debt reduction, I think is very important. I think that infrastructure is a legitimate function of government. Something that the private sector it just is not capable of addressing. But the president raises a very important issue, and he said, we need to negotiate. We need to see more negotiations in many of these infrastructure projects, because if we're not careful, we'll end up spending a lot more money on the same number of projects, and we won't get ahead by doing that. So we have to be very careful and not just see a bunch of inflation associated.
All right. Anything else you want to talk about? Things you've introduced, things that people are talking about?
Well, rural health care is still an issue that I'm working on. But we've been literally working overtime on tax reform on the Ways and Means Committee.
Yeah.
Part of the health care issue is in our committee with Medicare and taxes. But literally all of tax reform is in our committee. And so we've been having, I would say, 10 times as many meetings recently as the last few years, and that's healthy. I think that's our job. We need to do that. We need to have these conversations with the general public as well, not just among a few members of the Ways and Means Committee, but we want the general public to be energized, and sometimes that's hard to do on tax policy, but to really focus on what tax policy can do for our economy, because this, what I will call a broken tax code, this tax code that we currently have is a mess. It punishes, I think, good things. It actually makes it easier for people to cheat because it is so complex, whether they mean to or not. And it's expensive just to comply, just to figure out how much someone owes. That's expensive. You add that up across the economy, it's very significant. And so when we can simplify that not only leaves more people, more money in people's own pockets, but it shows that we can grow the economy in a much more effective way.
Just maybe on the first 100 days. I mean, he does have a new Supreme Court justice in. We are talking about a number of things. How is the administration doing so far?
Well, I think that it's been a challenge, make no mistake. A lot of the roadblocks that have been put up, I mean, there was a huge attempt to derail the president's Supreme Court nomination. But I think sticking to that nominee, I think, has been a huge success and sends a message moving forward. But I think that Judge and now Justice Gorsuch was a great pick, and not just because he's from a neighboring state, perhaps, but I think he shows some judicial temperament that is needed on the highest court in the land.
Okay. All right, very good. Thanks.
All right, thank you.
You bet.